So we are perfectly on time. The next slot, which is the one before coffee, is Julian Griffith. He's sales director at CONDECO, and his theme is around powering change, measuring and managing dynamic workspaces, which probably will tie quite nicely with the two previous speakers. So, Julian, thank you very much. Look forward to it.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Yeah. Right, so I guess I'll press there. There you go. Let's just check the time. Okay, so I thought I'd say a few words about almost kind of experiences from our side, from CONDECO, what we've seen from customers, what we're seeing from innovation coming out from customers and from the market. Maybe the things we hear from consultants, from partners, all over the place. And I thought I wanted to kind of distill this down into a short presentation with the theme of dynamic. Really, dynamic is the key word here. Workspaces that are becoming more dynamic in a kind of challenging way. Workspaces that are difficult to manage for both FM and property. And I'm focusing on the kind of measuring and managing side underneath the dynamic concept. So very briefly, just to set the scene, who are we, CONDECO? We do a number of things. You may have heard of us. If you haven't, that's what we do. We've been doing it for about 11 years, from basics like room booking, that's what we're known for, through to the far end, occupancy sensing. So that's kind of us. Got some pretty good references, some pretty good experience. So the base of stuff I'm talking about today is coming from quite a few customers around the world, and interestingly in different markets, because it's very different managing workplaces in India than in the US or Australia compared to Singapore, and we've done projects all over the world. So from a kind of macro point of view, what are the challenges that we hear? And it's not just me personally, but our support team, our sales teams around the world. Obviously, cost reduction is a big driver, and there's absolutely no doubt that a lot of people invest in technology and processes to help reduce cost. But I think we're seeing a big focus now on other areas. It's not just about reducing cost all the time. It's actually, you take the second and third points, it's about the interaction of people and how you attract the best people and keep them. The third point, blurring the lines between work and home. I mean, Google are quite well known. A lot of people hear on the speaker circuit, Google this, Google that. But actually what they're doing is creating these amazing workplaces because they want them to be just as nice an experience as home. They want you to go in there and have your free breakfast, free dinner, whatever you want, free beer, you name it, because that's what you get at home. You go to the fridge, you pull a beer out. So I think these are important factors, and the balance between one at the top and four others kind of gives you a hint to where I think things are going. It's not just about the cost. But there is a very hard link between having better workspaces, having more productive people, and actually saving money, and that's the balance that property managers have got to get right. I think in terms of sort of specific themes of what we're seeing, the first one is this kind of quality versus quantity, and I've got to thank Nigel Bunclark for this. Is Nigel here today? I don't think I saw him on the delegate list, but Nigel showed me at another presentation a really, really simple and easy to interpret graph, which I think came out of his work he did with IPD. On the y-axis you've got cost per square meter, so how much per square meter you're spending, and on the x you've got how much space do you give per person, FTE, full-time employee. And companies are kind of striving to sort of, let's say you measure where you are and you put a dot on the graph. You take your headquarters building and you count up the number of people and you count the amount of space you've got and how much it's costing per square meter. You can put a dot on that line, and if you go up the green line, you're still going to spend the same amount of money net. And if you go down the green line, you're still spending the same amount of money. So your total bill might be £1 million wherever you are on the green line. But what's happening as you go up, you're having much less space per person, but really high quality. So that's one type of space. And obviously, if you go down the other line, you're going to have loads and loads of space at the bottom right, but probably not very high quality. Maybe a big out-of-town industrial park where everyone can stretch out. But to save money, you need to come down into anywhere below the line. That's not a particularly good place to be, the red cloud, because you're kind of you're spending less per square meter, so you're lowering the quality, but you're actually giving people less space. You might strive to go into the yellow bubble and actually have more space and save money, so everyone's happy. But obviously, the ideal place to be is saving some money, but actually having higher quality. And I think this is what segues really nicely into the story about spending less money overall, but actually having higher quality spaces that people want to work in. And there's a story there about how you engage with employees, about the journey of having less space will benefit them, and there's a communication piece. And we're really seeing that. And again, I tell these stories because when we get involved in projects, and I'm sure other people in the audience have been involved in projects, you know, comms is a really big piece. How do you get people to come along with you on the journey? So if there's positive aspects to cost reduction, then, you know, all the better. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of, and this is very standard stuff, I'm sure you've all seen it before, but this kind of progression down the stack of different styles of working, from the classic kind of remote working, which has been around for years, and lots of companies do it. BT was one of the sort of the leaders in that space, working through the kind of flexible working and down. But there is a theme here of actually being able to have less space and higher quality, and a lot of organisations are driving down that stack to have less space and higher quality and net saving on spend. I think the interesting bit for me is kind of around the middle and bottom parts of it, which are less proven, less well known. I'll start with hubs. I mean, hubs are really, you've probably heard a lot about hubs, government hubs. There's a big program that's been launched from the Cabinet Office GPU to drive most of the public estate into hubs. The central government estate's already started. They've got Whitehall campus, which is a bringing together of lots of departments to share space. They're opening in October the first major hub in Canary Wharf. It will grow to 7,000 civil servants based out there. And their plans are to have another 19 of those sorts of hubs around the UK, on average about 6,000 or 7,000 seats per hub. So there's a massive move in government, and I think government's kind of ripped up the rule book and said, why are we having buildings for each of our departments, multiple buildings? Why don't we come together and share space in a very controlled fashion with the right technology and the right security and the right processes? But that's really exciting, and they've kind of leapfrogged the private sector in some ways. There's very few private sector organisations that are clubbing together and creating private hubs. But I think it will happen. I genuinely believe it will start to happen. And organisations are now creating alliances. You know, who knows, it could be a BT working with a Cisco, you know, people who have a shared connection in what they do and what they sell and what they deliver. And that's effectively giving them higher quality. You look at the government hubs programme, it really is about some seriously nice space. The place in Canary Wharf, I think they haven't announced exactly where it's going to be, but it's high grade, premium, classic private sector office space, and it will be shared, you know, shared desks, shared rooms, cost per hour usage of the space, very intelligent way. Down the bottom end, as we work through kind of co-working and into some of the more wacky stuff, has anyone heard of Space Hop? Space Hop, it's a bit crazy, but it's actually, I think they've got some customers. It's Airbnb, but for desks. And the idea is you work from home, you've got a house that you're heating, you're working upstairs in your little office or spare room, you've got an entire house. So people are now putting their downstairs dining room onto an Airbnb-style website, and they're taking bookings, and they're charging 20 quid a day or 50 quid a day if you're in London, and they're getting customers. And they've just had funding. I'm sorry? I don't know the legal implications, but the company behind it, it's a team of about 8 people. They've had VC backing. It's not a bedroom business. It's a serious business, and I think it recognises this kind of latent demand that's growing for more innovative places and ways of working. And it's not just about working at home, because there's so many people who cannot work at home for various reasons, be it kids, space, you name it. So I think that innovation we're seeing strongly coming through, and it's exciting. And in the US, there's even companies who .com, kind of Silicon Valley. Okay, they're a little bit at the cutting edge, and they have different dynamics to most businesses. But there are companies who have got rid of offices altogether. They don't have offices. Mozilla, Basecamp, Upworthy. They've decided to rip up, not have them. What they're doing instead is almost letting the employee drive where they want to work and allow them to spend a certain amount of money. It might be going to the local WeWork and having a one-person WeWork account. It might be working 2 days a week at home. They're getting rid of offices. How are people going to collaborate? But these companies have actually come up with very intelligent ways to collaborate. Of course, they've got video conferencing, Skype, Google Hangouts, but they're also renting per day or per hour meeting space when they need it. So rooms to get together their teams once a week in a local shared hub space. So there are ways to get away from, you know, almost above this is the classic one-to-one, everyone sat at a desk in an office. I think the third bit of which kind of segues in is different work styles. I think intelligent, clever organisations are recognising there's different styles for different people. People want to work in different ways. And actually, if you look across the different types, I mean, this is a little chart that we use for kind of trying to categorise how people might use our product, but I think it works quite well for kind of looking at how different people might use space in terms of space planning. But I think the key thing for me is that I'm realising that people are being challenged in the property function. They're being challenged to not just thinking about measuring and categorising these people, but it's kind of bringing the mindset into supply and demand. It's thinking of property as an asset that's flexing, and you need to think about the supply and the demand on that, and hence the supply, which is complicated by different work styles. Kind of bringing it together, what does it mean for those that have got to kind of plan offices and think about them? And luckily, this isn't our area. We don't do this, and there's a couple of people I recognise in the audience whose job this is. And some of what I hear is actually from them, but I think there's a kind of new type of work, restack coming on. The old terminology, restack a building, moves and changes, CAD officer who sits there planning CAD. I think actually a lot of that's going out the window. And it's coming into this new world of, here are my little bubble chart things where you plot, maybe you've got 3 buildings, maybe you've got 30 buildings around the world, but you're plotting for each building and perhaps even subparts of that building. Where do you want each of those buildings to perform on that scale? Because your HQ is going to be a very different cost per square metre and square metres per employee than your hub satellite office out in the Midlands, which is doing logistics, support, or whatever it is. So I think that the job of property planners is going to be balancing a portfolio with different demands across it if they're intelligent, restacking that portfolio. That's a classic sort of screenshot I found on the internet of I don't know what product it is, Accordant or something like that, or SerraView, where you restack. But the restacking of the building that you've got, but taking into account the different profiles and hubs. And then overlay the whole thing with the fact that we probably don't want to have, let's say you've got 1,000 staff. We don't want to have 1,000 staff all sitting in our own built or leased offices. We want to have 300 of them in that type of space. We want to have 200 people on flex private hubs. And we want to have another 300 or 400 people working at home. Not sure if that added up to 1,000, but you get the point. The portfolio of property is not about planning the buildings that you either build or lease. It's about planning the ones that you don't own and that you license or you have membership cards for your staff. So for me, that's the new role of the moves and changes. And I think perhaps in the future we'll see property managers having job titles like supply and demand manager rather than moves and changes manager. And they'll be adept at not design or CAD, but analytics. These are going to be data people. I'm already seeing it. A couple of our very big customers have data analytics experts who know how to use products like ClickView, and maybe it's the NJW, so reporting stack. I know there's lots of products that can bring out data and can recut that. But that's a skill set. You need to be trained. One of our customers has just taken a graduate from a maths degree to do this job. It's a very big occupier, so they've got, 50,000 people to justify the cost of that. But they've got a graduate dedicated to just analysing property supply and demand data. So I think what this is all about is the creation of these dynamic spaces that are really hard to kind of pin down. Because it was so easy before when it was one person to each desk. It was actually moves and changes, CAD planning, nice and easy. But how do you manage these dynamic spaces? I think that actually one of the problems is it's already started. A lot of organisations, most of the ones we talk to, already have a lot less desk space. They're by either without knowing it or kind of through the back door, they're already reducing the amount of desks they've got. They're adopting desk sharing practices, either pre-booked or just ad hoc, turn up and use a desk. And they're taking on a lot more contractors and transient workers. Now, this is, I think, something that's kind of crept in without a lot of people realising it. In the last 10 years, if you take a typical organisation, the percentage of people that are not on the payroll but are contractors, transient workers, short-term, long-term, however you want to do it, has increased dramatically. And those people are quite hard to pin down. Where are they based? Where do they work? I'm not going to give them a desk, no. And actually, when are they in the office? And it creates very, very odd patterns of demand. Now, that's all happening at the moment, and I think that is already creating a lot of confusion. I've had meetings recently where the staff have said, we've embarked on all these programs for saving space, and we've got this new office, but actually it's so blooming dynamic, I can't kind of pin down what's going on. And when people call me up and a team lead says to me, I've got a project that's just landed, or we've acquired a business and we need to get 50 people together for the next 6 months. Where do I put them? I don't know where the space is. We've done all this and we can't measure it. The week profile, Monday to Friday, has changed massively. If you look at organisations, perhaps again, kind of taking this 10-year view, it was a lot more static. You could predict Monday to Friday, a bit of a dip on a Friday afternoon course, and a bit of a peak on a Monday morning or a Tuesday morning. But actually now the peak of the amplitude, the sort of peaks and troughs have got a lot bigger. And I think it's actually leading to over planning on capacity. For a lot of organisations, they're actually going kind of full circle back and not making the savings they thought they could make because it's so dynamic. And I guess the challenge, without being too doomsday about it, is it's only going to get worse. It literally is only going to get worse, because go back to the first slide about the employees and retention and graduates, millennials coming out and wanting to have all sorts of funky ways of working. The trend is towards that rather than the other way. So that's a bit about the backstory. Kind of bring it down to earth, sort of measuring and managing. A little story about what we do and what we've seen in the last 11 years. As I said, since we started, we were very much starting from the kind of the managing rooms bit of the puzzle. You've got lots of meeting rooms. Every company has meeting rooms. It doesn't matter how big you are. You all have meeting rooms. And there was a challenge, and there still is, around how do you schedule that space. And if you don't schedule it properly, you have wasted rooms. I'm sure everyone knows the story. And then from that, through helping to manage visitors and vendors and all sorts of bits and bobs, we then started thinking about how you book desks. But again, it was this idea that I want to make sure that they're booked properly. It's like the hotel. I don't want hotel rooms empty. I don't want my aeroplane half empty. I need to book it. So all these resources need to be booked, and there's lots of ways of doing it. But that moved from the early days, and we were partnering with a lot of FM companies back in 2005 to 2010, a lot of our resellers and partners were FM companies who had this scheduling challenge for their clients, or it was end users, but it was very much about scheduling. They didn't really mind how many people actually turned up and used the space. It was just get it scheduled. And then I think around about 2000, 2001, it started to develop more into people saying, well, they've booked it, which is great, and we've squeezed the booking bit really well, and we've stopped people from just showing up and not booking, and we've made it really visible. But do we know if they actually turned up or not? Was the booking fulfilled? Was it needed? And we built ways to do that, and many others in the market have done that too. So that evolved to the sort of the middle part of the story, making sure that people show up and having processes to sort of raise the red flag if they don't show up. And then the third bit is bringing it together and saying, well, you booked it, you showed up, but how long did you use the space for actually, or how many bums on seats were there in those desks and those rooms? And that's where our decision was to sort of invest quite a lot of effort and time in doing a sensor. But I wanted to sort of paint the story because the next part of the slides, I'm going to talk a little bit about this occupancy sensing idea. And it really tracks back, as I said, to room booking and to desk booking. And there's a logical journey that we've taken over 10, 11 years. So when you perhaps, and you will hear more about these sorts of stuff in the market, measuring occupancy, I believe there's a strong link back to the scheduling of that space, and it's important not to break that link. And I guess to that point, I mean, sensors, like 10 years ago, there was really no concept of building occupancy sensors, apart from maybe certain building systems, lighting, heating, and various other things. But from an occupancy point of view, there were perhaps a couple of mavericks doing it, but it wasn't mainstream. And we've seen that really come on strong. But when we launched it 3 years ago, we had a few customers launched it with us. GE did a big project, and a few others. Barclays did some. But actually, in the space of 3 years, it's now really, we're getting a lot of inquiries. And I asked myself, why is that? What's changed in the market? I think it's the dynamic building. I think it's the confusion that's happening out there with property and trying to understand how space is used. Now, of course, we're not the only people that can help you measure space. So let's get away from the sales pitch, and let's just go back to, utilisation analysis. It's been around a long time. I'm not sure he's actually measuring space, but there's a black and white picture of somebody measuring something with a clipboard. But, you know, people have been measuring office utilisation for years, for decades and decades. And I think, you know, it's not actually that difficult. There's classic methods. You can walk around with a whole bunch of students. You can measure people. I think the qualitative bit's really important. Someone mentioned Leeseman earlier. They're doing some awesome stuff with the qualitative experience of offices. And you can never replace that with technology. You can aid it through technology. I think Leeseman use a web portal to gather stuff and others. But I think the quant side of it, the zeros and ones, the numbers, the utilisation, I think you can automate, and I think you can make it a lot more effective. But why do this? What's the point? And don't forget that. And it's an interesting little, you know, anecdote. Perhaps some of you kind of have experienced yourselves. I was at a big organisation recently, and they said, we don't really need to put sensors in. We kind of know the utilisation is bad. We know it's about 50 to 60%, but I'm really, really struggling with line managers, with heads of departments, with senior people. They won't listen to me. They will not shut down buildings because they don't believe the stats. It doesn't matter how many students I walk around the floors, they won't believe the numbers. So a lot of this is actually about having robust numbers that stand up to scrutiny, which is a bit silly, I think. But hey, it's creating a need for us to service, which is great. But I think actually it's human nature. And I think coming back to the analytics and the role of analytics, I think science and data is finding its way into many more areas of business. And I think in FM and property, it really has come of age in the last 10 years. And I think people want data. They want data-driven decisions, and they want those sort of big decisions to stack up with, you know, track back to a report that says, yeah, here was the data, we signed it off. It wasn't just gut feeling. It stands up to that scrutiny. So how do you go about doing it? From a technology point of view, there's lots of ways to measure utilisation. I thought I'd just throw up a slide with a few that are the most common that you might have seen or heard of. So you want to know how many people are using a space, using a building. You know, you can measure door access, either a swiper on the wall or perhaps one of those speed gate turnstile type things. You can overlay that with HR data, perhaps get a techie to bring the two together and work out what departments people are from and how often they're doing it. And I've seen one very big customer do it successfully. I've also seen one spend £1 million in London and get nothing from it. So it very much is down to who's doing it, how you do it. But that is possible. You can sniff, as they call it. You can sniff Ethernet. When people plug their laptops, you know where they are because it's a physical connection to a port, so you can work out where people are. But of course, a lot of people are moving to Wi-Fi, so you can sniff on Wi-Fi signals and place where people are in buildings based on Wi-Fi. And you can also now track people wirelessly from intelligent badges. So there's a number of long-range wireless technologies that will allow you to place people within a floor plate indoors via their badge. But the problem with all these ones at the top is they track the person, and there's a big privacy issue around that. And we're seeing that a lot of organisations are trying, and quite frankly are failing, to get employees to buy into being tracked and being monitored. And there's so much negativity associated with that I think these sorts of solutions, which are anonymous, have a much higher likelihood of being accepted and getting kind of long-term traction. So this, for example, is, I forget which way around it. I think this is a thermal imaging camera that you pop on the ceiling, and it just counts bodies. And they come from the retail, from shopping centres, which has been around for years, measuring you. I don't know if you knew that, but every time you go to a shopping centre, you're probably being measured at your flow, because they charge more rent on areas that have high flow. They're doing some really cool stuff, actually, if you're interested. They're now looking at faces. They've got facial recognition in shopping centres, so they can not just count the flow, but they can demographically place you male or female, and they can get a pretty good idea of your age just by a millisecond snapshot of your face. And it's being trialled at a couple of big shopping centres at the moment. So, you know, they can charge super dry a certain rent if they can prove there's lots of people going for that demographic, rather than, I don't know, the Bose shop where you've probably got a slightly older audience buying hi-fi kit. Anyway, that's thermal. That's movement-based flow cameras that are counting with an image, so using image recognition. But again, anonymous. It doesn't know who you are. And this is where we're going, which is more PIR-based. So it's a short range, a little bit like a burglar alarm that you might remember. Not many people have them anymore, but in the corner of your living room, you might have had a little PIR. These are short range, so about 40 centimetres. And we put these underneath tables and desks. to count the number of people in a room, in a meeting room, or at desks. But the great thing about these is they're anonymous, and you can actually manage the communication with staff quite well around saying, look, don't worry, we're not tracking you as an individual. This is about measuring the space so we can have better space, higher quality, overall spend less. The whole story sort of wraps around. The privacy thing, though, does have to be managed quite well. There's been a couple of quite high-profile examples of people that did anonymous tracking, not us, thankfully, but people that did it really badly in terms of the comms piece and launched it without telling people what's going on. Of course, there's backlash, a whole load of wasted money, and the sensors get ripped out. So it's really, really important to communicate with staff. Even if you go for the stuff at the top and you're actually tracking people, brave. But whatever you do, I think communication is really important. And explaining the story of why we're doing this, dear employee. We're doing this because we want to understand how the space is being used. And actually, I think most employees now, in any sector, whether it's public or private, big or small, I think most people actually realise the problem because they can see for themselves how crazy busy an office is on a Monday morning. You can never get a meeting room, you can't find a desk. Go on a Friday, it's empty. I think people have the common sense to realise that you need to measure space. And some companies are spinning it with a green angle. They're saying, look, we want to have greener buildings, less concrete all over these cities. Some people are doing it purely on cost. It might be, look, guys, we've had a bad quarter. We need to save some money. We're going to do an analysis and we're going to shed some leased space from our portfolio. That was a story recently we did with an NHS trust. They very, very successfully communicated to a unionised environment that the reason they're doing this is to save money and get out some leases in London. It was a major trust in London. And when you've got 2,000 back office staff in an NHS trust, what are you going to cut first, doctors or leased buildings? It's a really, really easy one for them. So what have we seen kind of towards the end of my little bit? What are we seeing out there? A slide here that's based on a combination of our studies that we did over a 2-year period, plus some information from CBRE that they kindly put into the public realm, just around sort of average utilisation. So again, I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but when you see the numbers, it is quite staggering just how badly space is used, both in terms of rooms and desks. I mean, huge underutilisation. And okay, bear in mind that we're doing these studies with organisations that have called us up and they have a problem, so they're probably already pretty bad and they need the data to prove the case to do something about it. We've also done studies, we've done one recently with one of the big service providers, not CBRE, but one of their contemporaries, and they were up at sort of 70 or 80% room utilisation, so really, really good performance of their rooms. So there is a big scale of performance, but actually a lot of people don't know where they are. And I think one of the interesting things is we keep coming across a lot more people who have perhaps done the desk utilisation using manual walkarounds, the old students, clipboards, but they haven't done meeting rooms because it's very difficult to actually measure room utilisation. You can't knock open the door every hour and count the number of bodies. Sorry, shut the door. So actually getting room, and when we launched our sensor, we thought the demand would be from desk measurement pretty much only. Turns out that room studies are really what people want to get their head around, because rooms are really, they take up a lot of space. The percentage of a portfolio for dedicated to rooms is quite big. Plus you kit them out with expensive video conferencing, acoustics, fancy oak tables and the like. Here's another study. This is what we did with a partner company called Unwork. They used our sensors to go to a major, I think it was a London-based organisation. And I think this is fascinating. Both charts is you've got client rooms and you've got internal meeting rooms. And what they found was, so the red bars is the count of the number of rooms they have. So red is like the supply. How many rooms have they supplied? And you can see they've got no small meeting rooms, but lots of very big ones. And then blue is the count of bums on seats, effectively. And look at that. I mean, it's staggering. They've got, I think I wrote down the number. It's something like 41% of their room seats. Yeah, 41% of their room seats are sitting in rooms that account for 3% of bums on seats in room bookings. 3%. So you're kind of thinking, guys, you don't need that space, or you need a lot less of it than that number, and you should be going out to flexible space. You should be renting rooms, even if it's quite expensive to rent a 15-seat boardroom. But I can assure you it's a lot cheaper than having a 15-seat boardroom sat and used a tiny amount of time. And what's happening is they're getting executives sitting in these rooms doing calls all day. So the booking system shows great utilization. I can't remember if it was our booking system or not, but it's showing, 80% utilization of rooms, they're all booked, well done, and people are showing up, we've got people checking in. But actually, bums on the seats, terrible. The story's a bit better with internal rooms, but not a lot better. They've got this massive supply of 7 or 8 seat rooms, the classic, table 3, 3, and 1, 1, 8 people sitting there, and demand is very, very low. So again, people doing conference calls, sitting in those rooms, they need to shift the red massively down in this. That's probably going to stay as an internal estate, but these client-facing rooms can certainly be an external estate managed by somebody else under a contract, put out to tender, use people like HRG or Capita, find and source the best prices. So interesting data, and that was based on I think that was only actually a sort of 4 or 5 week study. It wasn't a great long. It was enough data just to show what they needed. Okay, so finishing up, where's this all going? What's the future for us from a kind of technology point of view and as an organisation that's doing a bit of the scheduling and a bit of the measurement? We're really excited about taking things forward to much more. So I'll use the word dynamic again. So I talked about dynamic buildings, but actually what we want is to help users dynamically book and use space. So for example, taking the sensor information and overlaying it on a mobile with a little map of the office to find out where there is free space. We don't actually want people to have to book desks and book rooms all the time. We much prefer people just to use on demand, but have the data that's live so they know where to go. Obviously, if you're having an important meeting or you've got a day in the office where you absolutely need quiet time and focus, you're going to pre-book to have the certainty. But we really want to move it into the dynamic world. This is a mock-up of a concept of a live floor plate that's perhaps on a screen, a reception or in the lift lobby. And we're trialling some of these with customers at the moment. This is quite an interesting project we've done with a bank. It's actually a retail bank, and that's the cashier desks there. There's a little queue that flows around in a kind of S shape. And we're tracking the flow of people to show not just queue lengths and queue times, but also the way that the people are queuing for meeting rooms, because they have all these little rooms dotted around for meeting your bank manager and spending time with this. Now, this data was sourced through anonymous Wi-Fi tracking, because these are members of the public. So we can't put any software on them, we can't do anything. But you can. Most people now, and it varies actually geographically around the country, interestingly, but most people have Wi-Fi on their phones turned on. And they're constantly broadcasting a MAC address, which is unique to their phone. So with that, you can track the way that most people flow around a shopping centre, a bank, or an office. And the nice thing about it is it's completely anonymous. Another company did this in Hyde Park. I don't know if anyone heard about, I think it was O2, tracked anonymously across all of Hyde Park. They didn't use Wi-Fi, they used the mobile signal, the GSM signal, and they tracked flow around Hyde Park. And I think more and more people are kind of looking at how they can design better buildings and better cities through seeing flow and utilisation. So I think I'm just about on time. We're glad to take any questions or challenges. Again, as Neil said, challenge me if you disagree. Thank you. Question over there.
Before you ask your question, I think there's a microphone. I've got one here.
Okay, yeah. We're having a conversation with you about desk sensors at the moment, actually.
Okay, great.
Are very, very promising.
So which company is it?
Telefonica.
Okay, yep.
So I think the sensors are great. I'm not convinced by desk booking. We
Yep.
had a desk booking system we rolled out on our new Slough campus back in 2009, 2010. And a couple of years ago, I just switched it off as an experiment.
Yep.
And said it was faulty and just left it off.
Yeah.
And I think it works much better without it, to be honest, because the problem is there's no penalty for not turning up. People don't, if they don't turn up, you don't know a desk's available until say 9:15, by which time it's too late.
Yeah.
And people don't check out when they leave. Yeah. And it's just very cumbersome. But, am I wrong? Is there anyone else who's going the other direction and finding that it's got a value?
No, I think I perhaps wouldn't be too public about saying it, but I think there are definitely a lot of situations where desk booking is not the best solution for managing workspace, especially if you've got enough seats to house the people that are using those buildings. If you're running at 80, 85, 90% utilisation, you've still got some overhead. So I think you've got to look at your your pattern of usage. You know, if you're going over 100% on a Monday and a Tuesday and you're way below on a Friday, then you may need to have some sort of certainty for people to come in on the Monday and Tuesday. But there's a balance.
Doesn't it self-regulate?
Yeah, I mean,
so we've got similar problems with parking actually.
Yeah.
At the moment.
Yeah.
With those massive peaks.
Yeah, I mean, I think for every idea of putting a desk booking solution, I think there's an equally good option to put flexible furniture and space that can expand and contract to suit the demand of the week. So, for example, bench style seating, which actually I first saw at BT Centre has some very clever, simple bench style, expands and contracts. I think they've had that probably about 10 years there. And it's there for the Monday morning. So you're probably sharing about 50 or 60 centimetres on a Monday, but on a Friday you can stretch out, there's lots of space. So I think furniture can definitely play a role in that. But I think there's a certain part of the workforce that needs certainty for when they are perhaps rarely in the office or in a particular type of office. We've got desk booking projects that have been a real success where they've said, oh, it's our West End office, and everyone from the field force all around the country, whenever they're in London, they always want somewhere to crash down for 3 hours. We've got to have a booking system. It would be chaos without it. That's a perfect example. But at the other end of the spectrum, unfortunately, we've seen people that have deployed desk booking to people that are the same guys and girls turning up every day to the same desks, and there's enough desks and demand doesn't fluctuate. So it's pointless, and then people phase out, they don't bother booking, and they don't see a penalty. There's no negative in not booking.
I'm just not convinced it even helps in the scenario you talked about.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. I could be wrong. Maybe it's just the building we've used it in, and we haven't tried it in London.
Yeah.
But
So there's an
I'm
interesting.
not convinced it drives the right behaviours or stops some of those disputes going on.
Yeah. Where we're taking it is definitely on demand though. So we want people to know what the demand is as they're travelling in. So that's the kind of mobile apps approach. And then when we get there, we want them to verify they're physically there. So for example, we're launching a new little device, little gadget that sits on the desktop, quite a cheap, simple device, and they get their card and they just go, bing, I'm here. And it confirms their arrival, so you can get stats on utilisation and by department, so you can do chargebacks on how people are using space. And you can also then say, I can effectively opt in to be found. So colleague tracker, you can say, where's Julian today? Oh, he's just touched into the 8th floor, desk 56. I'll go and find him. So that type of on-demand, verify that you need space, or search for it first, verify you need it, and sit down, do your work, leave after 3 hours. But perhaps fast forward 3 or 4 years, and you may see on average more and more people struggling to give the employees certainty that they'll have space when they get in. So I think certain types of people will still need to schedule space, but definitely not everybody.
Okay, thanks.
Cheers.
If I take some of the key messages which have come out of that presentation, you're kind of suggesting, and I kind of partly agree with this, that we're moving to a place where corporates are going to take significantly less real estate. How does the FM industry respond to that?
Yeah, good question. I think. Well, obviously, if you take Regis, they're a huge landlord, tenant. They rent a lot of space and then sublet it. We work now 53 or probably up to about 60 by the time since I last read it, service centres around the world. Those service centres need FM contracts. But I think it's taking the end user away from the FM providers. I think it's putting a middleman right in the middle. And I think the likes of JLL, CBRE, BNP Paribas, I think those service providers are probably spotting this already and having the conversations with the providers of space about setting up contracts that ultimately deliver the FM services. But I think I can only see that taking the end user and the FM service provider apart and having somebody in the middle will mean that services will change a little bit. And I think the challenge to the FM providers is not losing the service touch, the high quality service that a lot of them are built up, and having this middle player. I'm not from an FM provider background. I know there's others in the audience that please chip in if you've got thoughts around what. But I think it's a good question.
Does anyone like to comment on Steve's question?
Yeah, I think the good news though is that I think I had a meeting not so long ago with CBRE that the service providers, the full width service providers, have already seen this and have spotted it, and I think they're moving the models forward and they're starting to try and work out how. I think the interesting challenge is, say for example you've got 20 or 30% of your space that's under your own buildings, your own leases, or you've built them, and you've got a contract with a big FM service provider and you really like that. Then you go to them and say, actually, I want to get rid of 10%. I want to put it into a WeWork or a Regis, Derwent, whatever. I think the clever FM providers will say, well, don't worry, let's see if we can strike up a deal and still be involved in the experience and the service provision, and actually set up kind of joint SLAs, joint definitions of process and service. So, but those that don't wake up to that, the FM providers that don't see this coming, I think will find it difficult to exist in the way they are now.
I think there's two themes that we've seen. One is around the qualitative. So I think it's a real challenge for FM providers to do that sort of service. So making sure that it does actually, the space does work, so you get a really good engagement. I think that's a real challenge. I think not everybody manages to do that. I think the second one is on the quantitative, which is how do you make sure you're in compliance? Because when these environments are so much more fluid, it's still really important to all the things you have to do for legislation, whether it's health and safety, maintenance and the like. And I think that the operators or the occupiers find it quite difficult because they don't always understand what they need to do. And I think those are going to be two major challenges going forward for both the occupier and indeed the provider of the FM services. So, any more questions for Julian? We're getting close to the coffee break, which is of course a very important feature of the morning. So we've got a chance for one more question, I think, if there's anybody who's feeling the urge. Can you use the microphone? The reason being that you may wish to save your question now because it's going to be recorded.
Julian, it's just a quick one, I think. Do you have any utilisation data with regard to Skype or VC usage within rooms? So much of what you've been talking about is people's behaviours. We've invested quite heavily in that as an organisation.
Yeah.
But we're actually finding green or non-travel or saving time. People aren't using it. They're still going to meetings in London or wherever.
Yeah.
So have you got anything that backs that?
Yeah, we do. We do, but I'm worried it's kind of slipping away from us. So the traditional video conference model was very high-end kit, which you have to pre-book along with the room. It's all scheduled, and you use things like Cisco TMS to orchestrate the call. And I'm talking about the technology from the last 10 years ago. That was really easy for us to count the number of room bookings that had video conference services, because you had to tick a box saying, I need video conference. That got sent to a service provider who ramped up the call. But what's happening now with things like Skype for Business, or what used to be called Link, and Google Hangouts and all these other new products, is people are doing ad hoc video conferences. You don't need to tell the system that you're about to do a video conference. You can sit in a meeting room, and then after 10 minutes you can say, tell you what, let's dial in John in the US, and you just go into your laptop, dial him in, plug your laptop into the screen, and the camera and the mic. So it's becoming quite difficult for us to know if you've had a video conference or not. I think we'll solve that. We're actually working right now on a big video conference integration project that will hopefully bring in data from Skype for Business, but it's not going to be as easy as it was before when it was a more rigid process. But you can certainly take stuff out of the other systems and kind of overlay it. I think the positive though is that products like Skype for Business, we are seeing huge adoption of them, and they're going from products that are used desktop to desktop. I sit at your desk, have a Skype call with John, to products that are being used very much in the rooms. And we've seen a big growth in that. And Microsoft is pushing just so hard into that area. Cisco has made some recent acquisitions in that area. So I think you're going to see a lot more people, and the technology is becoming really easy to use. It's not quite super simple yet, but it's getting to the point where most staff can kind of walk in, get the laptop, fire up on the big screen, dial somebody in, and I think the savings that for years people banded around huge travel savings by doing video conferencing. I don't think they quite got to the place where the salespeople promised, but it is now almost a sort of second generation, which is based around the PC rather than a box of tricks in a cupboard under the TV. Great, thanks very much.
Thank you. coffee next.
Cheers.
Thanks very much.